you're gonna get free this time. Falling into a blue sky mind. Came to me in that song.
Welcome back, beautiful humans, to You, Me, and the Elephant. This is Deb Air, your host. I'm surprised we haven't had this episode yet. And the episode's title is What is in a Question? A question within a question. If you've been following this podcast, or if you haven't, each episode, the theme title is a question. And I believe we've shared on here in the past why that is so. But for those of you who are just tuning in and are new to this podcast, the reason that we have a question as the theme of each episode is because of what a question can do. You've heard me talk about the gap space, and the third perspective, all different ways in which I have professed the value of how we can get into a place that opens the scope of our purview to what we are experiencing in life, that gives us some more information that maybe we were blind to or just not able to access. I believe that that is a huge part of how to navigate the world when we can look at life through a child's lens or eyes and be curious enough to know that no matter how old we are, that this life is an evolving, living, breathing, moving, evolutionary experience. And what we think we know about ourselves can constantly change. What I knew last year is much different than what I experience and know this year. I think one of the devastations that I see is that as life moves on in the ways in the culture that we're immersed in, is that many of us lose our imagination. We lose our curiosity. We get stuck in the everyday minutia and things that we have to do. We get stuck in what I was talking about in the last episode, very finite things. And even though we value the finite things of life, it's just a facet, it's just a fragment of what we can experience in life. And when we ask questions, especially from a curious place, it opens up an opportunity. And today I really want to talk about how we can look at questions a little bit more thoughtfully in a way of self exploration and consider, what is it that I'm asking? You know, who is it that I'm asking questions to? Where am I not asking questions? And I think that really recognizing where you're asking questions, if you're not even asking questions, if you're just looking outside yourself all the time for the answers, but not actually generating curious questions within yourself, that is definitely something that feels quite prevalent, is that we get caught up in the fear and the anxiety and the worries, and we have lost this childlike, what's that? When we were young and we were like between the twos and the threes, and your child goes through like, what's that, mama? What's that, daddy? Like, what's that? And you want to strangle them because you're like, oh my God, you're asking what everything is. And they're asking it with such vigor and excitement and curiosity. I think we can start to upgrade how we, or get more intimate with how we use questions. I think that that could be a way to bring that curiosity back in a way that could be super helpful. And you might actually learn a bit more about yourself. And as we're observing what tendencies or habits we have and what questions we ask or don't ask, then it can give us a cue as to where we are in life, to what's maybe really happening. And hopefully it brings you in closer to yourself and discovering more knowing, the knowing of thyself. So let's do this, shall we? What is within a question? There's many different reasons that we ask a question. And looking at the who we're asking, like I said, what we're asking, and is it really a question? As I was questioning questions, I was thinking of all the different ways in all the different arenas of my life that I'll ask a question. And some of my questions have not always been, I believe, true questions. What that discovery led me to, and an example would be, let's say I feel like I said something, maybe I feel like somebody's mad at me and I can just feel it. I can sense it. I can go to them and say, "Why are you mad at me?" Especially if we're in our family arrangements and people we see all the time that we're less curious about, people that we're in relationship with every day, we tend to become less curious. We tend to become more stagnant and consistent and sometimes less present because we know this person, we know how they're going to respond, we know what they're going to say, and we can get complacent. It's a little bit different having children, right? Because there's so much active growth happening. So they keep us on our toes in that way. But I think that when you're in your adult relationships, and especially those that, again, are in your intimate space every day, it can be very subtle, but potent in how complacent we can get and how we can stop asking questions. One of the most kindest things we could do with somebody we love is be curious about them. And also be curious enough about ourselves to be able to understand what questions we may have within ourselves that we would want to share with somebody we love. In intimate relationships, we talk about like the honeymoon phase and then, how do you keep love alive? I think asking the right questions and getting curious can be part of that. Life is this dance of having some aspect of I know who I am, like being a somebody. And then there's also like being nothing or nobody, which is like instability, stability. Like, I know who I am. I'm sure about this. This is how I do this. And then there's this other part that is unsure. There's a lot changing. I was talking to somebody the other day, and she was on the too much instability happening in her life where it was wave after wave after wave. So there wasn't enough stability for her to sit in herself and be able to process long enough before it felt like there was another wave happening. And one thing that I've seen in the work that I do is that we can never control the outside ultimately. I think we can influence the world around us, but I think that if we're looking for things to slow down or we always have to go to a deserted island somewhere to get recentered, it can be a tough way to navigate the kind of world that we live in. When we can begin to find this support, like in the integrity of our own body and our own being, then we can, even in the times that seem very unstable, we can find that stability within ourselves. And this parlays into questions because I think that there's a lot we can learn about ourselves. So, what is a question? It's a way of communicating where we're trying to get some kind of data, right? If we're in a defensive place, we may not really be wanting data. Or we can ask a question, really not for the question's sake, but to enter into a conversation to share your opinion about something. I think it's important to know that what a question does is it puts you in this gap space. It puts you into the potentiality of something that you don't quite yet know. In this time that we're in that is so powerful, which I talk about a lot on here, is this polarity where we're very solid in one belief or stance. And that could even be a state of feeling stressed and exhausted and anxious and overwhelmed. That could be part of the state that is overtaking you, and versus having something in the middle that allows enough of a suspension. So whether it's overwhelm and anxiety, whether it's a stance that you're taking, I've shared this here before. I had this spiritual teacher. I remember he would say, find God, like look at God, not just in the things that you love, but look at God or whatever your belief system, universe, higher power, look for that in things that you don't like because God is everywhere. Now, you can believe that or not, but it was an incredible way in to open up the curiosity to go, if I absolutely detest this or I don't believe in that, like, is there anything that we can get curious about? So, questions will bring us into a state where we don't have to be this or that. We can be something that's exploring. We can be the part enough of ourselves to know that there is always something in life that we can remember, AKA learn, because I truly believe it's about uncovering and remembering, like Michelangelo's David, like David was in that stone. I feel like we are in this body. And as we ask more conscious questions, we discover more of who we are, which then brings that home of stability and also allows for us to ask more questions, which opens up a little bit of that instability or the gap space where you're not just identified with one thing or the other, that you are open and you are free. And by being free and asking a question from that place, you are not trying to direct the sails on the answer of the question. Rather, you are receiving this as information of God, information of the universe. It's like the more questions we can ask, the more it kind of hits different buttons within our body that go, oh, I remember that. Oh, ooh, that feels off. Unless we start going out there and utilizing our curiosity through questions, we can become very stagnant. And I think that actually adds to how overwhelmed and how stressed we are because we become very solid in one state. So, questions also give you a clue as to the GPS point of where you're focusing. What kind of questions you ask can show you where you're at internally. A lot of times we're not even checking in, like what's happening inside here? What am I really feeling? And some of us are petrified to even have those questions or to ask those questions within ourselves. Allow yourself to be curious with yourself, not just with the people that you are interacting with. But what if there was so much that you didn't know about yourself and that it was like this really exciting trip, this adventure that you get to go on where you're like, I wonder what's in here today that I can explore. I wonder what's in here that I can learn about myself or AKA remember about myself. Wouldn't that be amazing to dip into novelty? I think novelty is another way to open that space because we have to, this is going to sound like such a contradiction. We have to remember that we don't remember everything. And when we ask questions, it opens up the landscape for us to learn what we have forgotten. And it could be the simplest of questions to the more profound questions. So notice what questions that you ask on a regular basis. If you're asking yourself, like, why can't I lose weight? Why am I so tired? Why is that person such a jerk? Why why can't I pay my bills? And we're asking these questions that feel very reductionistic. Like your brain is going to find the reason why for you because that's the brain's job. It's like, oh, you're asking me that question? Let me go run and find the file for you. You're not losing weight because you're well, I love sloths. I was going to say, because you're a sloth, you're eating badly, you're not good enough. And your brain will give you that answer. And it'll be this reinforcement of the things that you don't feel good about yourself. And we can do that in relationships. Why does she or he always do that? Versus like, what is actually happening right now? And that's difficult in relationships when we've had different ruptures. And I think every relationship goes through ruptures and every relationship needs to go through repair once you've ruptured. And I don't know that we're as conditioned to focus on the repair, the true repair of the natural ruptures that happen in our relationships. I think that we can do all of this internal work with ourselves. And I've heard this a lot. And I've probably said this to myself through my lifetime of like, okay, I got to work on myself before I'm ready to get into a deeper friendship or before I'm ready to go into this relationship. And although I value that as a way and accountability for self and a way of healing and a way of conscientiousness, I also believe that a lot of our fracturing, our rupturing has happened in relationship to other people. So the way that healing is going to take place is with other people. It would be uncommon and maybe not the healthiest thing if you're in a relationship that's not actually having any ruptures. When I say rupture, I just mean that a wound comes up because that wound is now safe enough to surface within your relationship, and that it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, as much as if you know that that's part of the landscape, that we are here for each other's remembering. We're here to love. We're here to heal and with each other. And that being curious about somebody that you've had a relationship for a long time, as if you didn't know what they were going to say, you weren't sure what they were going to do. Could you look at them with fresh eyes and could you ask them a question that brings you closer to them? Being a safe place so that when you ask a question that they feel like they can tell you the truth. And my highest value of love is truth. When someone can be as much as the truth of they know who they are in a moment and they feel safe with that in your space, that is the highest form of love. And when you can be and feel safe and ask questions and be asked questions by someone you love and you feel safe to answer the question, that is the highest form of love. It's opening up the gap space. It's allowing for you to add a little flexibility to be able to see or learn something that doesn't have to take your power away, even if you don't believe in it. If you can imagine that God is in that thread, that the universe, that there is some wisdom. We're living in a time where someone that is very close to me just said this, like, I sent something to somebody, to this person, and they're like, well, I don't even want to listen to this because of this. So they're shutting it down because there's already a judgment on something. And that's not to say like you get to listen and do whatever you want to do. What I'm speaking to is how do we close things off and not listen or ask questions because we are trying to stay solid in because we don't know ourselves enough. And I think we have to stay with a certain identity. And when we feel defensive and protective on that a lot, that is a really powerful sign that there's parts of you that are wanting to come to the surface. Because when we feel like we can explore ourselves and hear things that are so out of our scope, and when we can truly listen and ask from curious places, you will be so surprised at how powerful and what you can remember and what you can learn about yourself and others, and how that can reignite love with yourself. That can reignite or deepen love with others. And what is the purpose of a question? We're going to break this up for conversation's sake. That when I really started to look at questions themselves. Why do we ask questions? There's a plethora of reasons, but if we could titrate it down to three things. We ask a question, first of all, to gain something. We're trying to get some kind of information that we don't know yet. So we ask a question either to get some kind of categorization metrics. We want values. So let's say we want a blood test because we're asking, what are my blood levels? What's my hematocrit? What's my LDLs? What's my HDLs? What's my this? What's my that? Right? We're asking questions because we want to have some kind of categorization or data that's going to give me more information. And this is what we call informed choice or consent. And that's a whole other conversation we could have at one point. But we ask questions because we want to open up the scope and we want to get some more data. We want to get some more information. Sometimes those metrics could be spiritual. We want to get data from the universe. So we meditate, we pray, we run, we get network care. We're looking for some kind of metric, standardization, something that we feel like is solid that we can rely on, that we can use to either make decisions and feel like we're more informed. The other reason why we ask questions is because we're trying to connect to a feeling. We're trying to connect to our own feelings and we're trying to understand somebody else. And that's a really important thing. Like, how can we ask questions so that we can become closer to understanding what is it that we're feeling? What is it that somebody else is feeling? And how can that enhance our ability to communicate and to know each other? Now, everybody has their own style. Some people would prefer, what are you thinking about right now? Some people would be like, what are you feeling? I think it's important to ask yourself, what are the kind of questions you like people to ask you? I was somebody who, believe it or not, wasn't really, and I'm still not so much like a big question asker. But back in the day when someone would just like, that person that's just like ask, 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 and they just ask you question after question after question. And I would feel really contracted and bombarded. And I would feel like, oh my God, I don't even know how to answer these questions. And I think part of that was because there was some identity in me that needed to have the right answer, needed to have the best answer. It's very interesting now when people ask me questions because I pause and I really take to heart what they're asking me. And if I don't understand the question, or if I feel like there's a question under that question, or I'm just desiring more clarity, I will ask for that. In the past, if someone asked me a question and I wasn't really sure, my need to answer it correctly and be enough somehow by answering that question, I would just assume and maybe answer the question I thought they were asking. And probably 90% of the time, it was not accurate. And I just filled up the space. Has anybody ever felt that way? You just fill up the space because you don't know what else to say. And I think one of the most beautiful parts of intimacy is when we can just be with each other and we don't have to necessarily speak and we don't necessarily have to fill up the space with words. And when we are with questions, to go back to when someone would ask me a question, if I'm not clear, I might say, I think what you're asking me is this, or do you mean this? I will ask clarifying questions. And I'll tell you, like I said, 9 out of 10 times, I'm really glad I did. But there's had to be enough courage and curiosity and availability to know that it's okay to clarify what somebody's asking me. Or here's the magical answer. Sometimes we just don't know. Feel into that one. Sometimes we don't know. And we're such a population of having to know who we are or thinking we are proving who we are that it's sometimes really hard to say, I don't know, but I want to know. Or I'm not sure. I think I'm going to have to feel into that. I'm so curious. You've got me curious. I'm really good at it. I said I wasn't a good question asker, but when I do, like I'll download a question and I'll ask a question, but I haven't even thought of what my answer to that same question is. So it's like some unconscious way that I keep myself accountable for life because I know that I'm going to be asked that same question. So it makes me think, it makes me curious and exploratory in what that actually means. What is the question that I'm asking and what's the answer that I have to that question? And that it doesn't, answers don't have to be concrete, that questions are an exploration. There's a place where we can open the gap and we can explore. We can ask a question, is the world flat? And depending on where we were in our evolution, the answer would be yes. But we also know that the world is not flat. So we ask different questions. Is the world a sphere? Is it round? And the answer is yes, until we know more. So my point is questions, we may have a concrete answer, but like it can also, questions can open up more questions. And I know that sometimes that can seem overwhelming, like the world, like I have so many questions. It can come through an excited lens, like I have so many questions. I'm so curious. When we're inspired, we want to know because it woke something up in us that's like, oh my God, I think I'm remembering something. I have so many questions. And I felt like this owning a business, when my staff would ask me all these questions that I wouldn't have the answer, but I felt like I needed to have the answer. I felt overwhelmed with questions. And I think that is why, in general, I used to feel overwhelmed when people ask me questions because whatever my belief system was about myself, is I felt like in order to be worthy, I needed to have a concrete answer. I needed to have the right answer. And that was a lot of pressure to put on myself. So when we can look at questions as a way to gain access to more, to gain access to the mystery, then becomes more fun. And we start to use questions as a dance, as a way to have some fun. I was just having a conversation with one of my brothers, and he's like, I feel it harder and harder to be present. And I was shared last episode that when I was looking at the trees and my plants, that I was not present with them, even though I was looking at them. I think maybe adding this to your routine when you up in the morning, can you put your hands on your body and just check in and just say like, how you doing? How you doing, body? Is there anything I can do for you? What do you need? Are you thirsty? Are you hungry? Or just listen. You can put your hand on your belly if you're having GI challenges. I've been having a lot of shifts and changes at this time in my life, and I'll just put my hand on my belly and ask, do you need anything? These are very different kinds of questions that bring in a different kind of opportunity. Because I think that we can do closed questioning, which is the examples I gave before of like, why can't I lose weight? Why are you so stupid? Why? Where it's like very closed versus, is there anything I can do for you? What if just that's one change you made? Tomorrow morning, you woke up and you put your hand somewhere that felt comfortable on your body and just said, good morning. What's happening? How are you doing, body? Is there any way that you want to move? Is there any stretch you want to have? Is there any sound you want to make? I'm listening. Do you need anything? And just wait, like pause. That's the other thing. When we ask a question, are we really asking the question because we're wanting to get an answer? Or are we asking a question from a place of defense, from a place of closed questioning, of trying to stay in one purview? When we're asking questions from the place of love and curiosity, you get much different data and information and experience. So, how are you feeling this morning? Oh, I'm tired. Okay. Is there anything I can do for you? Is there any way that we can feel more inspired today? I could list questions that would direct the lens so that there's more space for you versus titrating down and getting just the reinforcement of how not enough you are or how shitty the world is or whatever it is. I'm not saying these questions are bypasses. I'm saying that they actually give you a wider perspective and more information to bring you through your day, to perhaps inspire you in different ways. And the third purpose of a question is to find meaning to things. Life is pretty dull when we don't feel like we have meaning to it. We all know that feeling when we feel a little flat and we feel like, what is it all for? What is my life about? What does it mean? What does anything mean? I think we start asking questions because we want to gain a deeper meaning of something. Because when we feel a sense of meaning, we feel a deeper purpose, we feel a deeper belonging of our world, of our lives. So I already talked a little bit about who do we use questions for. One would be ourselves, which was the example I just gave you, and checking in. And could you check in at night? A lot of people have a hard time sleeping. Could you get your hands on your body and say, is there anything I can do to help you get a great night's sleep? What a great question. Is there anything I can do for you to help you get a great night's sleep? And all of a sudden, you may get this view of like, oh my God, I actually want to take a really warm bath. And you might get out of bed and take a warm bath. You might go, oh, I want some water. Oh, I want to do this breathing technique. You might actually get answers. And sometimes it might be absolutely blank. But let me tell you, if you start and continue to ask these questions, you will get an impact and you will get answers. Trust that your body will find the answers to more conscious questions. One of my favorite Rumi quotes is, "We are not a drop in the ocean. We are the entire ocean in one drop." We are not a drop in the ocean. We are an entire ocean in a drop. We are entire universe in this body. So when we can start to ask more conscious questions, more loving questions, more questions that direct the camera to how you wish to be treated, guess what? The ocean is all there. The answers are all there. The more noise we have in our system, the less patient we're going to be for those answers. But the more you can ritualize these types of questions, maybe right in the morning and right before you go to bed at night, I promise you, you are an ocean in one drop. You will get answers. So you might as well start asking questions that are leading you to places that you want to feel more meaning, to lead you to places for how you would wish to be treated. The first place to start is start asking questions on how you would like to be asked questions, like to yourself. And that will start to shift consciously what questions you ask others. So the purpose of questions to gain some kind of metrics, some kind of feedback to go, okay, this is going to help me make this choice. Also, it gets you into what is the feeling of the moment and what is the meaning of this. All of these are giving you access to remembering, to sinking deeper into either yourself or others in your relationship. Also, the bigger questions, like the big questions, the universal questions, like, why am I here? What am I here to do? Who am I? Those are like the three big questions. Who am I? Why did I come here? And what am I here to do? Sometimes those questions are overwhelming. I think, especially when the questions for yourself, the self questioning, because we question ourselves a lot. This is the thing. We have so many questions. The more conscientious and the more life giving we make our questions to ourselves and to others, you're going to discover more of yourself. You're going to discover novel pockets in your relationships that will actually excite them and renew them. You also will start to be a little less afraid of the bigger questions. Who is God to you? Who is the universe? Do I believe that Rumi quote? Who am I? How can I discover more deeply who I am today? What is one thing that I can say when I look in the mirror and say, what do you have to say to yourself? And I can say, you are beautiful. You are kind. You are the universe. You are loving. You are brilliant. I start to ask questions that instigate things that bring out more of the beauty of who you are and more of the kindness of who you are. This goes into the last thing that I wanted to talk about is how can you use questions like I already mentioned to navigate where you are. So start to recognize, what are the questions inside your head? What are you asking people? What are you commiserating? Oh my God, why this? What that? And where are you not asking questions? Like I said, when that friend of mine said, I'm not even going to listen to this because of this other thing that I believe. So, where do you close off curiosity because you're unconsciously afraid to listen because you already have a judgment? Where can you open the door and ask a question and receive information that is a place where you usually kind of like put up a block and see how it feels? What does it wake up in you? What does it disturb in you? Because those are indications that there's something for you to feel and to maybe find some meaning of, and maybe open up the scope of what you're actually understanding to be true for yourself. So, if we want to honor questions and become more like question connoisseurs, we can look at the very bio body basic needs. Ask your body every morning and every night, like, what does it need? If you feel like you're binge eating, can you take a moment and just say, do you really want this right now? What are you feeling in this moment? And just pause a moment. Are you thirsty? Are you upset? Are you sad? Are you lonely? And try to track, like, feel your body, feel the sensations. And if you still want to eat that thing, it's more of a choice. And you're less in the victim of, oh my God, I can't stop doing this, or I'm binge eating, I'm eating unhealthfully, and we're just beating ourselves up. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Versus, let's say you have an impulse, and I'm just using this eating as an example, to eat something or to say something to somebody. Can you ask yourself a question first? And can you ask, and the reason I use the food and the example of body is like, try to feel what's happening inside your body. Put your hands on your belly and feel it. Breathe into it. Feel the belly expand and sink and ask, what do you need right now? Before you go into the action, you may still go into the same action, but you're starting to bring in more love, more presence by asking a conscious question. Then you can look at, which I kind of hit both of these, is like, can you do an emotional landscape? Notice the words that you say a lot. Are you tired all the time? Are you exhausted? Are you stressed? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? All these things are absolutely part of your human experience. However, when you're feeling the same thing all the time, every day, or most every day, you're not really in the of it anymore. If you're saying, I'm exhausted, okay, tell me more. What part feels exhausted? Take a breath, put your hands to your body, and be kind. Like, honey, what's happening? Do you feel like you need to take a nap? Do you feel like you need to talk to somebody? Tell me what's going on. What feels exhausting? You're going to get more information by asking these kinds of questions. Sometimes just doing that to yourself, you're going to see tears streaming down because it's making me emotional right now. Just by asking yourself a more present question, yourself is going to feel so seen. It's going to be like, oh my God, when I just asked myself that, something let go. I'm so tired of being exhausted. For instance, asking the question is a type of self love to ask yourself to get you into the feeling. The feeling is a gift. The feeling puts you into the present moment. And we have been conditioned to be so afraid of feeling and replacing it with thinking that we have become afraid of our own feeling, which our own feeling is a thing that makes us feel alive. And most of us, when we're feeling exhausted and flat, we're not feeling alive. So, what are the questions you can ask to get into the sensation and the feeling and the truth? And sometimes simply asking the question will actually put you into such a beautiful release and let down and thank God feeling. It's time to make friends with our feelings the best we can because they're here to serve us. They're here to inform us. They're not here to make us smaller. We can also check in with what I would call the lower thinking perspective. So, what are you saying every day? What are those racing thoughts? Check in and say, what do you feel like you have to do right now? What's the most important thing to know right now? What are you thinking about right now? Because the reality is there's so many thoughts living rent free in our head that we're kind of avoiding that. So those of us that are meditating, maybe we're new to meditating and we're just like off, we're here in a present moment. And then we're like being taken off on all these swirly thoughts. We become the observer and we give ourselves permission to watch them. Can you ask a question to your thoughts? Can you say, does that feel important to you? Is there anything else that you want to think about right now? Be kind to your mind. I think that those of us on a growth path, spiritual journey, we can get down on our thinking. We can get down that we don't feel present. And there's a whole spiraling that we can do. But if we can make friends with our mind and start asking questions like, hey, how are you doing in their mind? What are you thinking about? Is there anything you want to know? Is there anything you're hoping for? And you can do that in a way that's more conscientious. And I'll tell you, your mind will love you for it, which might also spark emotion. And this is how they start to work and weave together. And this is why asking these questions, these more poignant questions, These more open ended, expanded questions bring you into a journey of knowing thyself more intimately and more safely and more beautifully. And if we're feeling really stuck in minutia, like tunnel vision, can you ask your higher mind, hey, can you show me the bigger picture? If there is a bigger picture, what would it look like? What does the macro view look like right now? Could I zoom out for a second? These are all questions that are specific to your upper mind intelligence. By just simply asking, what if I were to zoom out right now? What would I see? That is a very direct question for your upper mind. Can you direct these questions from the biology to the emotion to the lower thought to the upper thought? And can we ask heart questions? What do you love deeply? How do you want to be loved? What do you know love to be? Can you breathe into your heart? And can you ask heart soul questions like, where's the love? If I could see gratitude right now, what would that look like? Can I find more love today? How can I be more love today? How can I use love as a verb today? These are questions that bring you more into the heart space. And I would even slow them down, take a breath in and out of your heart, and give the space. As we get into the heart and soul space, there's more space between the cells, between the words. These are ways in which you can practice getting better at asking more vibrant questions, more life giving questions. Just talking about this, I feel much more conscientious. And I do this a lot. This is something that I have practiced. It's why I love the question. But I do a lot of self talk, and I will recognize when I'm either asking myself closed questions that bring me more into a small vision of myself or judging myself. And I will catch it as soon as I see it and look in the mirror and just say, when is it enough? Where can I find the love? Like, where can I find the beauty in this moment? If you are a structure person, start with asking your body a question, checking in with what you're feeling, asking what your mind needs from you right now, and asking the upper thought, what's the bigger picture in this moment? If you could show me the bigger picture, if you could zoom out, what would you see? And asking heart soul questions. How can I see and be more love today? As always, I hope that this exploration into questioning, hopefully, we question everything through the eyes of curiosity, of love, of kindness, and even the hard questions. When we come from the place of curiosity, if we didn't have to defend ourselves and we could really listen by asking your partners and your family and the people you love different questions, and you learn more about them in a more intimate way from a place where you can truly receive their beauty, receive their truth. Thank you so much for listening and for engaging and sharing what you do with me. When you've listened to these episodes, I have some incredible poems that people have read, some beautiful emails, people that have told me things in person. It truly lights me up when I know that something we've explored here together has lit you up. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Until next time. And now, Trevor Hall
Found
with Blue Sky
in and
Mind.
through the body. It's in and through the body.